Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Webhealer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Webhealer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Webhealer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Webhealer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Webhealer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 345 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. What happens when the menopause hits? Not your client, but you, the therapist. My guest today, Counsellor Laura Davies, knows precisely what that's like. In the middle of a session with a long-term client, she suddenly found herself in a thick brain fog. Words were being spoken, but none of them were landing. In that moment, staying focused felt like climbing a hill in heavy boots. Today, she's going to share how that experience changed the way she works, how she adapted, stayed connected with her clients, and continued to work ethically while navigating the changes in her mind and body. It's something that many therapists will face, yet it's rarely discussed. So without further ado, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 345 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Both myself, Ken Kelly, and my colleague Rory Oakes are delighted to be here with you. And we're so glad that you've joined us. Today, we're going to be starting off with our ethical, sustainable practice, where we take a look at real life practice, what comes up for us. And today, we're going to be speaking about working with rehearsed material. And we also have an engaging talk with Sarah Henry, who's going to bring this to life. We're going to cover some theory, but then we've got a practitioner, seasoned practitioner, who's going to speak about how she sees this in practice. We then go into Practice Matters. Rory's beautifully teed up Laura's chat that he had on perimenopause. Make sure you stick around for that one. And then into student services. We see you. And if you're listening to this in real time, it may be that you're just starting your new academic year, specifically if you're here in the UK. And today we're going to be speaking about counselling skills, but we're going to be speaking about reflection, but doing a real deep dive. Reflection is more than you think it is. But we got to start off with our ethical, sustainable practice. And Rory, I wonder if you'd kind of introduce this topic for us. We're talking about working with rehearsed material. What is rehearsed material?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ken. And I think the best way of describing the rehearsed material is probably in the early engagements with clients when you first start to work with them and you meet them and you've probably gone through the contract. And all of a sudden, you say to them, where do we start, or how can I be of help today? And they just switch themselves on and off they go. And you're listening to a long narrative of what's going on for them, what their problems are. It's sometimes very scattered, and I think sometimes it's quite hard to keep up. It's like listening to someone talking about their lives, but in a very kind of disjointed way. Sometimes clients will speak in a linear way, but in my experience, it's, and then this happened, and this is what happened, and I said to them, and they said to me, and I don't know what I'm going to do, and it's a way of the client just offloading the huge bag, the huge sack of pain and anguish that they've been carrying around. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. It's like emptying a sack of narrative and emotions onto the floor at the feet of the counsellor, who then has to kind of take a deep breath and think very, very carefully about the directionality of where they're going to go with this, because it can be quite overwhelming. I remember my first few years as a practitioner, the first few months as a practitioner, and I remember it was quite overwhelming when all of a sudden you had to listen deeply to all this scattered information and try to get a sense of where the client was. Can be very, very tricky, and I think if it's handled well, it can aid the direction of where the client wants to go in therapy.
Yeah. Beautifully said, Rory. I think, you've explained that it can kind of catch you a little bit, and that it can be quite derailing, I'm going to use the word, when that shows up. I've brought up a lovely definition for this. So I've got this definition for you. Rehearsed material is a well-practiced, over-coherent story that a client can tell fluently about really painful events with little effect in the room. Often functions to keep distance from overwhelming emotions, preserve stability within the client, or gain a social or administrative traction. So that's a very kind of, I guess, cold definition of what it is. But you might recognize it. It's almost like the person is there, they're bringing what may sound to the ear like really painful, deep troubles that this person has gone through, yet you don't see the emotion in them. It's almost a rehearsed story. It's almost like they're telling you about a movie that they saw, as opposed to their real life. And it's got other names throughout the years, and this is not something new. Freud speaks about this in 1914. Freud was writing about this, and his writing says the following. He says, the patient doesn't remember anything, but acts it out. He reproduces it not as a memory, but as an action. He repeats it. And what Freud is alluding to here is that there was a lack of connection with the emotions. It was rehearsed material. Another name for rehearsed material is pretend mode. Pretend mode. And it's that mental state of, if I keep the story far away from me and I just tell that story without linking in, I am safe as the client. Now, where might we see rehearsed material? I think this is an important one, Rory. And I guess we might see, I'm going to use one example here, and then I'll pop the ball over to you, Rory. We might see rehearsed material in a client or a service user that has been involved in multiple agencies, has had a journey where they've had to tell this story many times over to many different professionals, and they develop almost a rehearsed way of putting this information over to get all the facts out, but while keeping themselves at a distance from the actual emotion or the pain. Where else might we see, or what are the clues we can look for, Rory, for rehearsed material?
Well, I think one of the clues is that sometimes rehearsed material lacks deep emotion. It's as you said, it's almost like the client's watching a movie of their life, and they're just repeating back what's happened. It's usually in the early engagements, in my experience of practice, where somebody is trying to almost convince the therapist of the urgency and the validity of what's going on for them and what's has happened. And this is particularly current, I think, when someone has been through multiple agencies. Because if someone's been with multiple agencies, what usually happens is they have to repeat their story time and time and time again. And my thoughts on this are that there's almost like a convincing the therapist that they're worthy. And I also think that it does speak to reading. If you get a referral, read the referral, because sometimes in the rehearsed material, clients may go through something that's very traumatic, and in the very early session, when they don't feel grounded or secure, become quite detached or sometimes unwell in the therapy session, disconnected. So yeah, there's a lot to it. It's not just someone coming in and babbling on, if I could use that word kind of respectfully, about what's going on for them. It is literally about validity, in my view, that they want the person listening to feel that what's going on for them is valid. And the more information they can get out, I think the feeling is the more valid they may feel.
I like that, Rory. I think you've really brought that together beautifully. And I guess it's understandable why a client may do this. And what's really interesting about rehearsed material is when we're linking to trauma work, if you're doing any kind of trauma work, you may see a higher instance of rehearsed material. And it's no wonder, because it's painful stuff. You know, we speak in counseling, there's a technique called reframing, where when you're facing an emotion or a situation that is too overwhelming for you, that you can use exercises to reframe yourself. And imagine you're sitting in a theater and watching this on a screen. Now let's discuss it. And you're able to kind of distance from the actual feelings and emotions. In certain instances, that is useful. However, when we're talking about therapy, where we want to be touching on the emotions, where it is relevant to touch on the emotions, we're looking for the client to go there, because there's the surface, we're not going to find the work. It lies in the feelings. It lies in the emotions. That's what we work with within the session. So it's important that our clients go there where it is relevant. And there are times where it is not relevant to take the person to those high emotions. But we're not looking at that right now. We're looking at this rehearsed material. So why clients do this? So it affects their protection from those incredible emotions that are just unfaceable. They just are not faceable. There seems to be a cognitive dominance over the memory. So if I can think my way out of it and go, well, it's not happening anymore, I'm okay now, I don't have to face that, big boys don't cry, we just got to carry on, and I can use my head and my cognitive abilities to talk about it rather than feel it in my emotion, then there's some solace there. I mean, there's some safety there. Another place where we might see this, and why clients might do this, is for service-shaped storytelling. Service-shaped storytelling you would see if you worked in an agency where you have multiple referrals from multiple places. And sometimes clients are coming in and they've got an agenda of what they are there for. Sometimes it's not therapy. Sometimes it's just part of their journey, and they've been sent for this therapy that they have to interact with. And it's service-shaped storytelling so that they can get to the next goal that they are kind of working out within the services, or how they see it. And this is an interesting one, it could actually show itself in a counter-transference loop. There's a new word for me, Rory, when I was doing the research on this, a counter-transference loop. Therapists may feel bored, drowsy, or pressured to do something which can collude with the script of that rehearsed material if it is missed or if it is unexamined. So there's a lot to take on board there. And I guess when we look to what might we be looking out for, what might we see, how might we recognize that rehearsed material is coming within a session, and some of the keys, we look for high fluency but low vulnerability. When the story is told in great detail, but yet the person does not seem or appear to be emotionally moved by that. Low affect congruence. So horrific content told with a flat tone, dry eyes, no emotion shown at all. That can be an indicator of rehearsed material. And relational distance, very little curiosity about how this lands with you, minimal checking in. It just seems like a little bit of a distance between you and the client. But I think what counter-transference loop where us as the counsellor, we may feel this counter-transference and find ourselves bored, maybe irritated, maybe not knowing what to do, maybe feeling that we have to jump in and do something with this material. So there's an element, I guess, of self-reflection as we speak about this topic, Rory.
Absolutely, Ken. And I also think that, it speaks, I think rehearsed material speaks to storytelling. And what the client is doing is telling you a story. And what could sometimes be surprising, and it surprised me as a very wet behind the ears trainee 25 years ago, was that people can tell you very, very horrific material that's happened to them in a way that is completely disconnected from any emotion, almost like they're reading it from pages of a script with no emotion connected. And I think that there's two processes that we need to be aware of. I think the first process is not to automatically think that the client isn't emotionally connected to what they're telling us. I remember saying to my supervisor many years ago, this client gave me a litany of abuse she had as a child. And it was just like she was reading a shopping list, going to the supermarket. And my supervisor said, well, that's probably what it was, because it was probably like going shopping, because it was probably an event that happened on a regular basis and she's had to protect herself. And I think the other thing is with stories is not to get sucked in. And not to get too lost in the narrative. And we've always said on the podcast, Ken, that it's a two-highway situation or a two-road situation. You've got the story and you've got the music behind the words. And I think there's always a bit of a danger of getting sucked in too much to the lyrics, if you like, and not to the melody, and I think we just need to take time. With rehearsed material, in my view, I always said this to supervisees through the years, is it has to come out. And then once it's dropped, we can start looking carefully at what is the priority for the client, what does the client want to look at, as opposed just to going in, gung-ho and trying to talk about everything or reflect on everything. It is a process, I think, that takes a bit of time, but not jumping into the story or not being, getting yourself into a position where you're thinking, is the client really upset about this? I don't see any emotion. All these are really part of working with rehearsed material, because it's a
100%.
very really early presentation that in the arc of therapy that we have to be thoughtful of.
Yeah, very, very much so, Rory. That is absolutely beautifully said. And I think what is really important here is to put in that ethical view on this, avoid forcing the retelling. So it's not our job, if the person is bringing rehearsed material, and we'll get onto some little interventions we can use in a moment, but if that person is putting a distance between themselves and the material that they're bringing, there's a reason for that. We don't want to be going in heavy-handed and kind of forcing a retelling. It can re-traumatize, and that can really be damaging to a client. There's usually a reason why the rehearsed material is at distance. Our job, I guess, is to know that rehearsed material exists, what it is, how to spot it, and now we're going to just speak a little bit about some interventions that we can use to very gently bring that client closer to the emotions of the material. And as you've said, Rory, we need to do this with kid gloves. We need to tread carefully. We need to have patience with the client. Sometimes they just need to get that story out in the beginning. So we leave the space for that. So we're going to go to just some small interventions. These are little micro interventions that you might use if you are feeling that maybe the material that you're seeing is rehearsed material. And one of them, it's a simple skill that I guess we all use all the time. It's that as you say that, I wonder what might be happening in your body right now as you say that. And it's just very gently saying to the client, I see your words, but I wonder what is happening inside as you're saying that. And then another one, this is like more going into the getting consent from the client. We might say, I notice your voice gets very steady here. I wonder if it'd be okay to pause with that steadiness just for a moment. And what we're doing there is it's a very gentle form of immediacy in a way. You're coming in and you're saying, I notice you're really steady as you're saying that presentation. I wonder what might be going on for you underneath that. Another thing that you can do is you can use sensory anchors. So you might say to the person, what did you hear? What was going on around you? Invite details in, because in details you can't be in the narrative. You need to go back and actually look at what really happened. And the interesting thing about the narrative, when the rehearsed material is coming out, there is a disconnect. It's it's almost like a script that's been written. It's like a movie script. They're not really looking at what happened and how they were within that moment. They're bringing you a summarized version, almost a ChatGPT summary version of what happened. So we can ask, what was it like? What was that situation like? We can ask a question that might just kind of get them to have to look, re-look on that. And name the function without shaming. My hunch is this story helps keep a lid on a lot that might be going on for you. I think that's a powerful one. I think it should be used with care and caution, but it is a way of kind of inviting into the deeper material. I wonder if you had any other thoughts on ways and little interventions we might use, Rory.
I think if someone is sharing something that is, very personal to them, but in service of building a relationship, you can thank them for sharing it. I think that just by saying, thank you for sharing that, I can see from what you've said that you've gone through a really difficult time, and acknowledging how you honour the material that's been brought. The other thing that crosses my mind, Ken, is that rehearsed material has a really another function, and that is a test of the therapist. Because how many times have we as practitioners heard clients say, I don't want to tell you anymore in case it upsets you. And I think sometimes rehearsed material can be a way of just testing out the mettle, if you like, of the therapist. Because I'm sure that when other people are told that people either discount it, disregard it, or avoid it, or change the subject. This happens a lot in families. I have to say, in my experience, where someone's talking about abuse or loss or real powerful, deep stuff, and family members either can't handle it, or they discount it, or they just basically think it's not happening. La 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 la, fingers in ears. And I think that when a client comes to you, especially if they're new to therapy, they may think, are they going to be like everybody else? Are they going to do the same things that all the other people I've told my story to are going to do? So by thanking them for the story and really showing presence, being really present, makes a huge difference. And in some cases, you can see the relief. It's like literally putting down a heavy sack. When you've carried something, a heavy rucksack or a heavy bag, and you put it down and you go, whew. It sometimes feels like that in the therapy room. And, if someone makes that noise, you could reflect on it and say, feels like you put down a heavy sack or a heavy bag. Wow. And acknowledge what's really going on in the here and now. There's a lot more to rehearsed material than we might first think, Ken.
There is. There's great depths in rehearsed material. And I worked for some time in recovery services where we were dealing with a lot of clients and referrals from many different organizations. And I can't tell you how many times I heard the words, I've told that story so many times. I'm just so grateful that you took the time to listen. It's just echoing what you've just said there, Rory, because so often that rehearsed material, they're not seen, they're not heard, they're seen as the presentation by the person. The person might be writing feverishly down what the person is presenting with so that they've got the narrative or the story written down. I'm not talking about in therapy, I'm talking about in services that may sit around therapy. But when you just stop and really listen and just be kind and patient, just that active listening is incredibly powerful, because you're seeing the person, not the material, and it allows the person to also see themselves and not just the material. It's not just a story anymore. It's something that they actually went through. And I want to link into here one last thing before we go out to our special surprise of Sarah Henry, talking about this very topic in practice and in her application along with you, Rory. I've listened to it and it's absolutely beautiful. The reason why Rory and I chose this topic for today is because it's important. It's important for us as counselors, psychotherapists, to always be developing what we do. However, that ethical angle that I spoke about on this cannot be understated. It is so important. We don't necessarily want to go diving into the material if there is deep trauma. And I think this just lends itself, Rory, to the importance of trauma training. And we may see that rehearsed material as a buffer from the trauma. We don't want to dig in to deep trauma unless we have been trained, that you've done the CPD, that you've done a course on trauma-informed practice before going in to heavy, because it can be very damaging. There's a reason that the client is putting a gap between them and their story, and we need to understand how to work with that. If we take that gap away, how is that person left? How do we hold that person once they've opened up and they've touched on that hard material? And that is covered in trauma training. And of course, as always, Counselling Tutor, we do train a trauma-informed practice course built by you, Rory, and an absolutely incredible course with some live sessions as well, where you actually get to see the theory come to life and look at how you're going to build that into your practice. But Rory, I want to hand over to you now as you introduce our roving reporter, Sarah Henry.
Yes, well, we met Sarah before. She's been on the podcast, and she's known as the race trainer. She specialises in talking about race and how and culture, and how we can engage in that in a respectful way. But also, little known is that she's an ACE trainer, and I refer to her as an ACE trainer because she is an ACE trainer. She's a really good teacher, and I met up with her and spoke about how we work with rehearsed material, maybe in practice. So this is a more a qualitative view, how we do it, what it looks like. And Sarah really does outline very well what it looks like. And this is what she had to say. So we're joined by Sarah Henry, also known as the ACE trainer. She'll hate me for saying that. And someone who I've got a massive respect for. She's professional trainer of therapists, runs her own training establishment, Greenwood Counselling Academy in Nottingham, to its full nom de plume. And she's here today to talk with me about rehearsed material. Sarah, you're so welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, it's always, I don't know about your experience of training students, but when students come back after their first encounter with a client and they talk about what the client said, we as trainers and more experienced therapists can sometimes see that as rehearsed material. And I think it's really interesting to help students understand what rehearsed material is. What's your take on it?
I think it's to be expected. I think if you have a client who is coming into therapy, then 9 times out of 10, they will have done their own unofficial research, whether that is going onto Google and asking what to expect from therapy, or watching some of the American dramas where somebody lays on a chaise longue and they're told to give their story. So I think expecting a client to come with a planned story is one of the first steps when it comes to practice. And it's not that we as therapists need it, but we can understand that clients are coming in from a place of being vulnerable and wanting to be helped. So if they make sure that they get everything in the way that they think it's to be scripted, then what they can do is they can do in air quotes, a good job, and be a good client for you.
Yeah, so there's a performative element to this, isn't there, Sarah?
Absolutely. And what it is that we do is reach to empathically understand that performative element. You know, what is behind that for the client. There's vulnerability there will be anxiety there, perhaps pressure, desperation, all of those emotions, but that is part of what the client is bringing. That's part of who they are. So it's about working with that, not necessarily denying it or colluding with it, but accepting that as part of their experience.
Yeah I also think it speaks to the arc of therapy. So, you know, people talk about building a trusting relationship, but trust doesn't develop in session one. So there's a I think with rehearsed material, and rehearsed material is a story that clients will tell each other, tell themselves because they only have so much time in the first session, and they want to leak it out and tell their stories. Mm-hmm. But there's also a protective element because I think I don't know what your thoughts are, but at the beginning of therapy, I think there's always a testing of the relationship. Will the therapist be able to withstand the material?
Yes, and not every client will explicitly communicate that. It might be, oh, you know, I want to protect your feelings. I don't want to harm you. Or it could just be with this sense of drip feeding material that's been rehearsed in order to test the waters with facial expressions or a raised eyebrow that might come out. So in all of the ways in which clients are entering the relationship, I think it's vital to remember that they are the ones that are being asked to trust. And it's their material that they're being asked to trust us with. And we have to hold them in that. And that trust is evolving. It has to build. And to expect that a client will trust you because we have a nice smile and a lovely profile picture on what it is that they've seen, it can cause us to take advantage of our position rather than working with the person in front of us in the place that they're at.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. What's a good way of, I don't know, as trainers, just thinking about how do we prepare students for that first session and engaging in the rehearsed material? What's your thoughts?
One of my favourite ways to do that is when students bring up the question, and it happens every year, the question of, well, how do I know if the client's lying? And from a person-centred perspective, which is the way that I practice and teach, my argument is, well, if it's part of their phenomenological experience, then who are we to say what the truth is from the outside? There will be a reason behind everything that is happening with the client. And what it is that we're striving to do is to step into that phenomenological experience. So the way in which you best prepare yourself is to be open to the fact that there may be elements of their experience that are being denied or distorted as they're engaging with you in those early sessions, but for you to strive to remain congruent in that and to work with what it is that they're giving you, because it's being given to you for a reason. And you can either take it as a lie, in which case you are denying it as part of their experience, or you can take it as, right, okay, there's a reason why this is happening, and my job is to facilitate these conditions, and then either take it back to my training or my supervisor to say, I just felt like something was a bit off there. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was either a contradiction that I didn't want to call out in the first session because it would have been too aggressive, or just something that didn't sit well with me. But those are the places to start to really understand what's going on in those early days of the relationship.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Sarah. And one of the things that that I think I picked up there was you're kind of alluding to the 19 propositions, Rogers' theory of personality, that denial and distortion. And I don't know what your experience is, but my experience is what a client starts with may not be with what's on their kind of mind. You know, they might start with something as a bit of a starter for 10, as we say in the north of England. It's a starter for 10. And then what might happen is what's really on their worried mind might emerge.
Yeah, when we think about any kind of relationships that we form, whether that's a brand new friendship or a brand new romantic relationship, it's very, very rare that we start with the depths of who we are as people and work backwards into, and hi, my name is Sarah, after all of that. So it's appreciating the fact that this is another format of relationship, and that does have to slowly build and develop. And clients may not always be explicitly aware of what it is that has brought them to therapy. They just know that there is something that's troubling them. So yeah, it could be that they start with a disagreement that they're having with their neighbour, because that's all that they have access to. And in the safe environment of the relationship as it develops, then what you start to understand is that they want to uncover something in their childhood, or perhaps something on a deeper personal level, whether that is trauma that they want to process. But yeah, it's giving the client the chance to grow to trust you.
Yes.
And giving clients the chance to grow to feel safe, because after all, they're the ones that determine whether or not they're safe. We can't prescribe that. We can offer our understanding of that, but they're the ones that ultimately decide if they're safe and if they trust us.
Yeah, absolutely. We can make the environment as safe, I'm kind of putting air quotes in here, as possible, but ultimately it's their own perception that provides the safety. And also, I guess, sometimes therapy might not feel safe, when we get into the latter stages of it, where maybe the emerging material's coming. It's very possible that it feels very unsafe for clients. And, as student therapists may wish to kind of consider how they're going to be in that relationship, because the relationship's the cornerstone, isn't it? And,
massively.
Yeah. What advice would you give to student therapists, or observation? Never like giving advice. Observation about sort of working with a client who feels a little bit unsafe or a bit wobbly?
First and foremost, if you have become aware of that feeling, if you think, oh, there's something going on here, I can't quite put my finger on it, I would say take it to supervision straight away. If you aren't clear on what it is, then you are going into very murky territory by offering that to the client when you yourself are unclear about that. So yeah, take it to supervision. You have fortnightly supervision. Take it there, and honestly start to think about, right, what was it that was going on for me in those moments? Is it my own insecurity that's come to play? I should be a good therapist. I should be able to do this. There's some conditions of worth there for you. Talk about it with your supervisor. And then as that relationship is developing, it's very hard to say, in the 37th minute of the 4th session, that's the exact time to bring it in. But working with what's in front of you, and working out a way in which what you can do is to build the relationship up and the trust in that relationship by being honest. Being honest by offering that. But you've got to be clear about what it is that you're offering to begin with. And what we don't want to do is to lumber the clients with our insecurities dressed up as, I'm doing this in your best interests.
Yes. Congruence conquers all at the end of the day. And I think that's a good fallback position as a kind of attribute to a therapist. I'll leave you with leave this section with one of my favourite quotes from John Schleen, who was one of Rogers' protégés, and he wrote his principles down many years ago. People, long-term listeners to the podcast will have heard me reference this, but he says, in terms of client experience, there are denials, cover-ups, lapses of memories, but we are the ultimate source. And what he's talking about there is there might be a lot of clutter in the way of what really is going on for the client, and that can come out in rehearsed material. So thank you for your expert insights, Sarah. It's been a real pleasure to speak to our training correspondent, and with that, it's back to you, Ken.
Well, we now go into Practice Matters. Practice Matters is a part of the podcast where we bring in an expert to tell us about what they know so that we can all learn. You can put this down on your CPD tracker. And of course, Rory, you've already introduced Laura Davies, who spoke about perimenopause. Give us a short taster of what we're going into.
Yeah, well, I caught up with Laura on LinkedIn, and she'd written a post about how her own experience of perimenopause had impacted on her practice. And I thought it was quite a fresh approach to what is discussed. You know, we discuss it a lot about clients, so it is discussed a lot about clients, but Laura shares her personal experience of it and how she navigated the symptoms or the presentation of perimenopause in the therapy room and in her own practice. And this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Today, we're turning our attention to an area of practice that often goes unspoken. What it's like for therapists to navigate perimenopause while continuing to hold space for others. We hear a lot about how to support clients through menopause, but what about when it's happening to the therapists themselves? My guest today is a counsellor who recently wrote a powerful LinkedIn post reflecting on her own experience. She describes sitting opposite a long-term client and suddenly finding herself unable to focus. Words were being spoken, but they weren't landing. It felt, in her words, like reverting to level 1 counselling skills. At first she questioned the process. Was it a case of transference, a rupture in a relationship? But eventually recognised something far more personal. She was in the grip of perimenopausal brain fog. In today's conversation, we'll explore how this experience reshaped her way of working, how she learned to stay present, how she adapted her approach, and what it means to work ethically and relationally while managing your own changing internal landscape. This is an honest and grounded conversation about a stage of life that many therapists experience, but often in silence. I'm grateful for my guest bringing this to light. So with that lengthy intro over, welcome Laura Davies. It's lovely to see you, Laura. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I was struck by your LinkedIn post. You described that things felt unfamiliar, the words were flying past you, you couldn't connect in the usual way. Can you take us back to that experience and what was going through your mind as a seasoned therapist at that moment?
At that moment, I would say panic is probably the best way of describing it. It felt almost kind of otherworldly, like I was in kind of some surreal dream. And, you know, I appreciate people experience these things differently. So this might not be somebody else's experience. But for me, that's what it was like, that I was almost kind of suddenly couldn't remember how to listen or how to kind of process what was being said to me. And it was with a client that I've done a lot of work with. So it wasn't kind of a new interaction. It was someone that I was familiar with being in the room. So it was a real kind of surprise as to, you know, just in my head, I remember thinking, what's going on? What's going on? What's happening? And then thinking, oh, I'm in this. I have to keep going. That was the other part, I suppose.
Sounds a bit otherworldly. It sounds like there's you're in one place, but you in another at the same time.
Exactly. It felt really surreal. Because this is where kind of perimenopause and menopause come down to. It wasn't part of my identity. That's not how I'm used to being in a room with people. So it felt very, disconcerting for sure.
Yeah, it wasn't part of your identity. It felt like something else. And you mentioned in the article that you kind of tried to narrow it down. Was it transference or rupture? When did you first begin to suspect it might be related to perimenopause?
That's a good question. Not long after. I think what I realised, especially talking to my supervisor as well, is that, as I said, I've known this client a long time, and there wasn't anything going on particularly at the time that would relate to either of those things. There wasn't anything new we were talking about. And then also, I suppose, noticing within myself a pattern within that. So in terms of being within my cycle, noticing, not just at work, but outside of it, that certain days I was struggling more with brain fog, with the indicator of brain fog, and then kind of piecing that together as time went on.
Yeah, did this realization challenge your sense of identity as a practitioner?
Hugely.
Yeah.
Because I've always, I think, held some kind of validation in myself at being able to use my words, being articulate, being able to process and capture what was happening in a certain way. Not to say I can't do that now, but maybe I do that a bit differently. There's a great quote, which I can't properly remember, by Sharon Blackie, which is about the idea that menopause really rocks the foundation of who we see ourselves as being. We've kind of built ourselves up with this self-identity, and then menopause comes along and shakes those foundations. And that really kind of sings to me in that same way.
Yeah, it sounds to me like a bit of a snow globe effect. Snow globes are those things that you usually put out at Christmas and usually has a Christmas scene, but it's a defined scene. You look at it and you think, well, that's the scene. And you pick it up and you shake it, and all of a sudden that scene changes dramatically. You covered in artificial snow.
Yeah, exactly. And then I had a sense of, what if I can't do this anymore? What if this is how it's going to be, actually, and I can't actually be a counsellor anymore, which is something I've done, for the last 12 years. So then what? I started going down those kind of thought processes.
Gosh, the thought that you may not be able to carry on in the work that you're clearly competent in and you love.
Yeah, exactly. And that's similar for many women in different jobs as well, having to change roles and having to stop. It's not unusual that might have to be the case, but I hadn't really considered that might be the case for me.
Yeah,
it's not, I should say, but that was what was happening at the time.
Do you think society is more aware and adaptive to the menopause? When when I was growing up, it was discussed in hushed tones, and never in front of men. And I come from a very northern working class background, and it was only as obviously I'm married and I have a daughter, the conversations became more out in the open and more understandable, and I could, in my small way, contribute to that. But do you think this has become easier for women to talk about perimenopause or the menopause in a workplace or in general?
I think I would say that it is probably easier. I think there's definitely a permission to do that more. But one thing that I have noticed is a question about where do we do that and with who. So obviously people have friends, similar age, maybe they're comfortable with. But if you don't have that in your life, great, let's talk about it, but who do I talk to it about? One of the things that I did was set up a menopause cafe, actually, which was like a monthly group for women to come along and be able to share experiences and support each other under that premise, really, of, it's great that we're being kind of educated more, and there being this kind of permission in society of, right, now we can talk about it, but we need to find those spaces to actually be able to do that. And if you don't have those in your community, you're just as alone with it anyway. Yeah,
absolutely. And that sounds like a really useful collaborative place, the menopausal cafe, as you put it, so women can share their experiences and explore how they're navigating this new for a lot of women, the women I've spoken to, new environment, new stage of life. How can men show allyship, do you think, when working with colleagues who may be going through perimenopause?
I mean, I think there's something about asking questions, educating. I mean, it comes into that dynamic that we often find in these things is, you know, should women be educating men or should men be finding ways to educate themselves? I think there's a balance in that to some degree.
Yes.
But being listened to is obviously really important, and men being receptive to what they're hearing and trying to have an understanding of what it's like. And I think it's really hard, I think, to explain to. So I've got male friends, and I will kind of explain to them, for example, brain fog is one of my, I like to call it indicators rather than symptoms, because I feel like symptoms makes it sound medical.
Yes.
And it's a natural process that we're going through. It's not something that's happening to us. It's part of us. But brain fog is one of those things for me. And I try to kind of explain to people, you know, I can't remember my diary. I have to really keep really good logs of what I'm doing when. I can easily forget things. And then men might say to me, oh yeah, I'm like that as well, and da, 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 da. And it doesn't mean that they're not. I understand that, but I think what's missing is the identity shift, whereas I never would be like that. You know, I could tell you for the whole month exactly when I had appointments, what I was doing, everything about clients, and that's really shifted now. So I think for a lot of women, it's more actually the change in who they are rather than the indicators that are the problem. You know, now obviously indicators can be, and people have different experiences to the level it impacts them. So I'm not trying to say that they're not something, you know, that's important for us to understand and help to work with. But it's that real shift of, oh, I'm not who I used to be anymore, that I think is the part that can be harder to get across to people.
Yes, and I think speaking as a man, I think that realizing that it's not like something that I as I'm getting older, I'm becoming more forgetful. That's just a process of age, and that will be the same for some women as well. But it's not that; it is something that is unique to women as they move through the arc of their life. And I guess not to dismiss it or try and compare it to your own experience, which I mean, this is my view, I think is a bit diminishing, because it's not something that a man can go through. I'm going to get letters in the post bag. I know I'm going to get letters in the post bag. But in my experience, I'll caveat. So to understand it is a unique experience. And it's quite interesting about the point you come up with about men educating themselves, and about generally educating ourselves about the other in our world. Because, like you say, the last thing you want to do is give a masterclass on perimenopause to someone who hasn't put the effort in to try and find out themselves. And it's interesting, and it's not difficult to start a respectful conversation. I was with someone yesterday who I like very much. It was a professional relationship I have with this person who's a woman. And she mentioned she was going to the hospital for a scan, and I said it's really important for women to, look after themselves. She mentioned she'd had a birthday, and it got us into quite a respectful conversation where, you know, she talked a little bit about where she was in the world, and without any effort. It didn't mean that she had to start off by educating me first. Or not feeling embarrassed to talk about it. You know, there's a mutuality there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So, as you're moving into this kind of place, you mentioned adapting your way of working. How are you adapting your way of working?
Well, I think I mentioned before about tracking cycle, and that's really helpful for me, because there are certain days that I really recognise that I struggle with brain fog, and not that means that I shift my client appointments or anything like that, but it helps me to kind of be aware of the process, I suppose, of what's going on for me before meeting clients too. I mean, I work outdoors, and I do work indoors, but also have experience and training around working creatively. So I think what I've found when I'm struggling more with the kind of brain processing is to bring the work a lot more into the present and make it a lot more relational, which again, I do anyway in my practice. It's not a new thing that I only do when I have brain fog, but it's definitely a way of being able to be more in the present with, and exploring someone's inner world, for example, using drawing or using kind of, I have these kind of small figurines that I might use. Obviously outside, there's a lot of different things that, we can use creatively, but kind of bringing it into that way. So it's coming away from head, essentially, and moving into body.
Yes.
Or moving into, those kind of processes that don't need the head to be quite so involved with.
Yes. Yeah, so less of kind of theoretical application and more of being, and which kind of conversely, really is, conversely is probably not the right word, but is exactly how therapists work. We work with a sense of self and the sense of experience in the other. So it seems to me that this could be quite an advantage in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I recognise that sometimes personally I can be someone that's too in my head and too much in those kind of thought processes. So there is, I don't want to be that person that's like, menopause is a gift when, I talk to people, but it does bring something, if we kind of think about it as this natural process, it brings something into our lives as much as we're grieving and losing something else. There are these things. And for me, it is, has challenged the way that I work, but not necessarily means that the way I work isn't any better or worse, but a new way and a remembering maybe of a way of working.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite a striking. Quite a striking observation, in that when clients meet a therapist, they're meeting another human being, and all that encompasses a human being. And for me, that's quite wonderful, because that's really good modelling for you to be a human being going through a process in your life. Because if you're working with a female client, they may very well be going through that as well, or go through that at some point.
Yes, and then we kind of move into the questions around self-disclosure. This is where it sort of gets slightly more, for me, complicated. That's the word that comes to mind about how if you manage things around that, I think.
Yeah. How do you manage that?
I think it's the real standard answer about client-to-client basis, which I know is always the answer, isn't it? But, when I kind of deep down think about that, if we're talking about brain fog specifically, my concern around that with clients is that I can't always hold the breadth of information about them that I might like to if I'm not experiencing it. Yeah. So a small-ish, I suppose, example can be, whether they've got brothers or sisters, if they don't particularly mention them all that much, it might not be kind of as accessible to me. But I'm aware with a client who, has had messaging about not being important and not being seen and heard, that if I don't hold some of that information or it becomes clear that I don't remember something, the rupture that might cause in the room. Yeah. Now, as always, we know with rupture and repair, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing necessarily, but I can be quite aware that it might come as a result of something that I'm experiencing, which really doesn't have anything to do with the client and our relationship. So then it's questionable about whether or not that might be something that I might bring up or to explain. But then within that, this is why it feels complicated. I'm aware that depending on whether someone's experiencing perimenopause and menopause themselves, they still might not quite understand what it's like to not be able to remember. You can explain that and say, it's because I'm experiencing perimenopause and I'm struggling to hold on to and remember this. And they might kind of understand that logically, but it still might not really hit with them actually about me not being able to remember. I've got friends who are slightly younger than me, and I've talked to them about brain fog, and they're like, okay, yeah. And now they message me and say, oh my God, now I really understand what you mean by that. Like, you explained it, but it was like, oh, okay. I've gone on a slightly tangent, but, I guess that kind of, it doesn't always hit with the client. So particularly a client who's a younger client that isn't experiencing it, or a male client, is it helpful to say I'm experiencing perimenopause when to them it's, does that mean anything?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one, because Obviously, I'm a male and you're a female, and I think we're having quite a respectful and kind of curious interchange. But I guess it might not always be that way. If you're working with a male client, you may find someone who has a working understanding from an outsider's perspective, shall we say. But then again, you may have someone who just doesn't know or doesn't care, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And, the thing with self-disclosure is always around for the benefit of the client.
Yes.
And the work, isn't it? And so, whether that's direct or indirect is another kind of matter, I suppose, within that as well. And so I suppose we're thinking about whether or not we're disclosing almost like the indicators as opposed to the actual whole thing. For example, if I'm feeling really tired, would I disclose that even though that's part of my perimenopause? Would I say that it's perimenopause, or would I say if I'm feeling really tired? Where's the disclosure in a way? What's important for someone to know? Maybe not the whole picture, maybe just what's affecting our interaction.
Just share a sense of what's going on for you, the nuance of it. Yeah. Do you have you found that you may have put pressure on yourself because that article was very, very powerful. I sensed a slight, and I may be wrong, but when I read it, a slight panic at the beginning of like, oh, what's going on here, and why isn't the mechanism working as it did, and I can see you nodding in agreement there.
Yeah, no, that was exactly it. Yeah.
Did it bring any form of a pressure on you before you kind of made peace with it or came to terms with it? Did you feel that was something that was in you? It added to the experience, or shall we say the challenge?
Do you mean in the moment? Did I feel pressure?
Or generally within your practice?
I'm not sure what you mean by pressure, as in to
Well,
talk.
that you were saying that this was quite new for you, and you went to see a supervisor. I just wondered if it had added any kind of psychological dimension to the way you work with a client. In other words, you're thinking, can they tell? Am I getting it right? That type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in the moment, I was super aware of the fact that I wasn't really connecting. I felt like I wasn't really connecting. And I think what helped me in that particular session, which I keep saying, is because I'd known them for a long time. And so I had a sense of that even if they sensed that something wasn't quite okay, it wasn't kind of final. It wasn't going to cause anything that was major enough, and that if I needed to talk about it, I felt in the moment that I couldn't talk about it at that point because I didn't feel I could quite understand what it was to be able to do that.
Yes.
If that happened again, or I might respond to it differently, and be able to voice it in a different way or find my words for it. I think it was the kind of blindsiding of it.
Yeah.
That added to that. Now I've got a kind of a holding of it and a kind of narrative for myself around it. I feel differently about being able to express it, but yeah, definitely at the time.
You gain some self understanding of your own process and how that works.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I'm sure there's going to be a listener listening to this that thinks this is happening to me, and they may or may not be in a state of kind of serenity with it. They may be very worried, as you were when you outlined the beginning of the process for you. What observation would you share with that person? If someone came to you, a woman sat in front of you and said, I'm not sure if I could go on, I'm having the brain fog, there's other processes going on, what would you say to them?
Do you mean like a client or another
therapist? Another therapist, yeah.
I mean, that's a big question. That's tricky. I mean, I think there's definitely something in deciding how you want to manage that.
Yes.
So, for example, I keep saying the word indicator instead of symptoms, but, speaking to the GP or getting support around that, what that might mean. I think definitely talking to supervisor and supervision about how that comes up, because the thing with it is there's so many different indicators that affect things so differently. But so there's definitely something about understanding what that might mean for your practice and how you work. Brain fog is an obvious one, but emotions can be something which can feel, and again in my own experience, quite uncontrollable. So what that might mean in terms of going forward, and considering I do have friends who are therapists who have had similar situations or at similar times in their lives, have decided to make changes to their practice around number of clients they see, how they manage that as well. And obviously that's quite a kind of more extreme situation, having to change that. But always being open to what that might mean. For some people, being able to have more sessions in the morning, for example, so trying to shift people more to the morning than the afternoon might be an example of something you could practically do that would help manage things a bit more. And then within that, tracking your cycle, that's one thing that I'd say to any woman anyway, outside of perimenopause or menopause, but tracking your cycle around moods, around sleep, around any indicators, so that you feel that you have more of a sense of it. Because I think one of the big things experiencing talking to a lot of women is it's a sense of feeling out of control, essentially, around what's happening. And so if there's a way of, it doesn't mean you can necessarily control these things, but having an understanding of them, that takes away some of the panic and uncertainty, I think, around it, for sure.
Yeah. And I think what I've heard is that menopause can't be avoided. It's a natural progression of a woman's life journey. In terms of practice, it can be managed thoughtfully and ethically, and it doesn't stop any woman working as a therapist. It just might mean that a little bit more mindfulness and management is necessary. It's been a delight to talk with you. I was incredibly moved by your post on LinkedIn, as I have a number of women in my life who we regularly talk about the kind of changes and life phases that they're going through, and it's something I think that is very little discussed, I think, from a therapist's perspective. So, Laura Davies, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Laura. Massive thank you to you, Rory, as always, for holding those all-important interviews and bringing us the continuing professional development. And don't forget, we've got a whole library of continuing professional development lectures. It's the Counsellor CPD library. Just go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is there for you. But we now move on to student services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting. And it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counsellingskillsacademy.com. Rory, I wanted to share with you that yesterday I sat and listened to episode 1 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Now we're on episode 345. And one of the things that struck me when I listened to episode 1 is how at that time the entire podcast was to support students, and we spoke. It's always been the heart of Counselling Tutor is we recognize that students are the future counsellors. If you've got a student that really knows their stuff going out, they're going to make a massive difference in the world. And that's why we will always have student services. We will always have a focus on you, the student, on your formal counselling journey. And today we're speaking about the skill of reflection, but we're going a little deeper than one might think. Over to you, Rory.
Yes, I mean, I think that when we talk about reflections, what we're talking about really is reflecting emotions. So we have reflection and paraphrase. The paraphrase is repackaging what someone said and putting it into your own words, so the person who's spoken can really understand that they have been heard and understood. But a reflection is a reflection of the emotion behind the words. And I think sometimes it's again that two lane motorway, that 2-lane highway, where you have what's the words, but the emotion behind it. And I think it's really, really important that when you're reflecting, you're trying to accurately as possible match the emotion of the client when they're talking about it, so that the client not only gets the narrative back, they've understood, but also the reflection of the emotion they've spoken with it. Because here's the thing, sometimes people are a little unaware, or it's on the edge of awareness, of what emotion they bring. You know, I've said to someone, you sound really, really excited about that. And they said, am I? And then they paused and they said, yeah, actually, I'm really excited. And you can just see how being heard, being understood, not only for the words you said, but the emotion behind it is so powerful, because it shows that someone's really paying attention and is really caring and listening deeply. And that's, in my view, that is what builds the relationship in therapy. That's one of many of the cornerstones of building a good quality therapeutic relationship, reflecting the emotion.
Oh, I love how you've framed this topic, Rory. So I see reflection as a bridge, as you've just described it. And it's the bridge between the narrative or the story that the person is bringing and the actual feelings that are going on underneath that story. And we're not talking rehearsed material now, as we were in the first part of this. It's just a natural thing that we might do. And I've got a definition, so let me put the definition in now. So definitions are usually quite cold and theory based, but I'll pop it in for you anyway. So reflection of feeling and or meaning is the counselor's succinct response. So it's usually going to be quite short, a reflection that captures the client's experience, the content, the emotion, and or the underlying meaning, and feeds it back to check understanding and to help the client hear themselves, what you've just said, Rory, of somebody hearing themselves for the first time. And it's central to person-centered therapy and to active or reflective listening. So it's very, very important in person-centered theory. If you're learning a different modality, you're still going to use it as an active listening skill. And there are different types of reflection in counseling. So they're kind of broken down. You might have a content reflection, which I guess starts to edge onto paraphrasing. So it's going to mirror the facts and the meanings that the person has brought. But then you have the feelings reflection. So it names the emotion. It might be like, wow, that sounds frustrating. Might be the reflection. And that invites the person to look within themselves and go, actually, you know what it is? It is frustrating. In fact, I'm quite angry about it. So it allows the bridge from the narrative, the story, into the actual feeling. And then meaning or depth reflection, which it voices what is significant, what matters to this person within this narrative. And I guess once we understand the theory and what types of reflection there might be, we go on to why. What use is reflection for the counselor, and what use is a reflection for the client? And we've kind of touched on the client already. It's we've spoken a few things, but it actually serves you as the counselor as well, because it gives you an accuracy check or an attunement with who that person is. We might be listening to the narrative. We're looking for the music behind the words, as you so beautifully put it, Rory. We find the bridge to the feeling, and we're in a way checking our attunement. Are we standing next to that person, feeling it as they do? And it gives the client an opportunity to say, no, actually it's not. That sounds frustrating, might be the reflection. They might go, no, it's not actually. I don't really care about it. It's more X, Y, Z. So it gives us the opportunity to be corrected and be more in the frame of reference of the client. And it can guides timing and direction. The client's connection confirmation shows you where to go next. If you go and you find that there is an underlying emotion or something charged behind those words, and you're able to build a bridge to that using a reflection, it may be that the rest of the session is all about that you've just discovered together. And I think that's the important thing. It's together. You are finding it together. It's a process that you undertake together. And I guess then, what does reflection do for a client, Rory? So how does it benefit the client?
Well, I think that it connects the kind of separate emotions, because one of the things that I've learned over the years is that sometimes emotions are pretty hard to pin down. Humans sometimes really struggle with them. And by having someone reflect back the emotion, it starts a process of, as you say, Ken, is that how I feel? Or is it something else? Now, if that's how you feel, it's a case of, that's exactly how I feel. That's it. I feel frustrated. I feel angry. I feel sad. And by naming the emotion, you actually get it into what the real issue is within that person. Alternatively, what can happen is they go, no, it's not, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. So you've got some nuance there. But what most importantly, the client's naming now naming the emotion. See, you see where that's going? They're naming the emotion. And, I think that sometimes clients maybe don't have a very, not all clients, but some don't have a very clear emotional palette. They don't have a clear, because emotions are taught as a child. We taught emotions. And if we're not taught them, what can happen is that they become confused or misunderstood. Anger's a classic one. Someone's angry, then anger's a secondary emotion. It's usually the bodyguard of shame or sadness or fear. And you're now starting to get really into what the client's process is. And then that opens up a whole new avenue of discussion and self-discovery for the clients. There's a lot more to reflections than one might think in the first instance.
Yes, and it's interesting that as a skill, it serves the client, but it serves us as the counsellor as well. It kind of gives us an understanding of where we are, where we might dive deeper. But as you've beautifully put there, Rory, it definitely serves the client. It makes them reflect on their own things. It helps them find emotions, as you've mentioned there, that they maybe didn't have names for. And reflection might even be helping them with a name. And I think it's important to put in here that reflection is not parroting. It's not just saying yet there are times where their words said back to them are enough as a reflection, and they can be really powerful. But we wouldn't want that to be all that a reflection is. It really is the reflection of what we are feeling empathically that is going on, or the meaning behind what is being said. And I guess, where would we use reflection? I think that's an important one. So we might use a reflection if the emotion seems to be really close to the surface for this client. And you'll know it. If you've been in practice or you've been in placement, you'll see it. You'll see where the client is touching on an area, and you can see there might be the voice tone may crack slightly. There may be a long pause with a breath and all of these might give us indications that this might be a powerful place to use a reflection appropriately. And after a key disclosure or a metaphor, so if the client brings something big, something meaningful, and you can see, they may say, I've been wondering whether for the last week whether I'm going to tell you this or not, but here it is, and then they give you something. That would be an incredible place that would show reflection is important here. It says, I hear you, I see you, I understand what you are bringing, and it reinforces the client that they were right to bring that you can be trusted with their information. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that, Rory?
Yeah, I mean, I think just thinking about what you said about someone bringing really deep stuff. This happens in when we're working in a trauma-informed way. So one of the things about reflections is that sometimes people may start off with just quite surface material, and it might be quite hard to get a handle on what emotions behind it. But when they talk about something really powerful, and sometimes it's like dropping a bag in a room where someone drops a bag and you can hear the thud, and that it really means business. There's something going to happen here. And I think it's the same in therapy. When someone drops a huge disclosure, being very close to the emotion of that is really important, because it supports the client's decision to bring this material, and it also provides an element of safety. So if there is the emotion that you can clearly see when someone discloses something, if you reflect that emotion, then you've validated the client's decision to share something which could be really, really personal. So it does take time. One final observation is, don't guess emotions. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people will talk away and you think, well, are they angry? Are they sad? Just take your time. The emotion will come to the surface.
Yeah.
And when people might talk very succinctly about terrible things that have happened to them, and eventually you will hear the note of the emotion. And it's at that point, I think it's useful to reflect back. You sound. I can hear the fear in your voice when you talk about it, or you feel really angry about it. I can hear the anger, and it's the whole thing. It's clients being seen for all their aspects, not just the story, but the emotion behind it, and it makes a big difference. Once that's keyed into, then clients then feel, in my experience, may feel that now that the therapist is tuned in to them, that they can bring more, that they can disclose more, and I think that's really important. If it's done properly, you'll get the whole song, not just the chorus.
That's bingo. That's all the lines, all the corners.
Yeah.
So when you say that, when we're reflecting, it's not a reflection of a parroting back. It's not just the reflection of the narrative. It's not just the reflection of the feelings. It's the reflection of the entire person, how they're sitting, where they're looking, what their hands are doing, when they make eye contact, when they don't make eye contact. Now, we don't always verbalize that, but we're reflecting it back. It's a core skill of active listening. And when we're actively listening, we're not just listening to the words, we're listening to the entire being of that person. So we've covered quite a lot today, but I wanted to kind of check out on the reasons where you would avoid using a reflection. So we've spoken about where we might use reflections and how it works for the counselor, how it works for the client, a definition of what reflection is. But there are times where we can go, whoa, this is an inappropriate use of reflection. And we should always be evaluating our skills where we can. Maybe after the session, as you're looking back, you might go, oh, you know what, that felt like I was doing a bit too much parroting. It felt a little bit mechanical. So we aim for the essence, not the echo of the client. So there's an area where you might go, okay, hold on, I need to work on my reflections here. Another time where we would not use a reflection, or we would use it incredibly sparingly, is if the client had asked us for any clear information. So if we were doing any psychological education, we would not be using a reflection in that. If we were doing safety planning with a client, we're there with a very specific purpose. We place it one side for that. And another time that you would not put a reflection in, because remember, reflection is bringing you closer to the client in terms of that empathic bond, and basically you're saying to the client, I'm on your side with this, I see you, I hear you, this is right, I'm with you. So another time where we would not want to put in a reflection is if we're about to challenge the client with a risk or a boundary that may have been overstepped, or if a risk is brought up in something that they say that we see, we would want to just take reflection, just pop it into the back pocket just for a moment or two while we deal with that. That's kind of the business side of counselling and psychotherapy. We got lots of podcasts on that, haven't we, Rory? In terms of
Yeah, and I'd also say, Ken, if you're doing a referral, if you have to do a referral, sometimes we see people at first session, and you realise that they've been misdirected. They may need another form of support. That happens. That happened to me a lot as a student, and not to open a process, because I think that's what we're referring to when you talk about risk planning or any kind of practical application contracting. What we don't want to do is open a process that we can't manage or help the client close at the end of a session. And reflection does that. It really is the push button of opening, helping the clients open up and starting a process. It's like the start button on your car. You press the key, you press it, and the emotional engine starts, and you then have to work with that. So don't be too keen to use reflection on very practical things, such as contracting, or even first contact on the phone. If you're making an appointment with a client, they may be telling you about what's going on, but just be thoughtful. You don't want to start a process before they're actually in the therapy room. And I do think, as we always say, Ken, supervision, journaling is absolutely important. It's one of those skills that only gets more refined the more you use it and the more you reflect on it. And feedback. If you're doing a work in your child's feedback, get that feedback. How accurate was it? I think good tutors probably do an empathy scale sometimes, and do that. But it's very powerful. But it is the key to starting the process. So use it wisely.
Agreed. Thank you. And I think that's a little deeper dive on the skill of reflection than is normally done. And hopefully you got something of use out of that. And I wanted to share something that I think is really important. And you've just touched on it there right now, Rory, where you're saying, journal, look introspectively at yourself and who you are. If you've had a session, go and think about the skills that you use, what worked, what didn't work. If you're getting triads, like you say, get your feedback. And here's something that is absolute gold if you're a student and you're learning your skills, is make a little description of what each skill is. If you listen back on this podcast, we've spoken about what it is. We've given a definition of reflection. We've said what it does for the counselor. We've said what it does for the client, said when to use it, when not to use it, what might show that it's a good time to use it. If you create those little keys for yourself for all of your skills, they really, really help us understand and fully embody those skills. And the best place to get that kind of information is counsellingtutor.com. It's free. If you go to counsellingtutor.com, we have got a counselling search engine on the site. Really, just click on the search bar and you can search. If you put in reflection, it's going to bring you back the skill of reflection. You're going to be able to see what it is. You'll be able to download the handout, and you'll be able to have that on hand. And you can do that for all of the skills. If you put in silence, you'll get the skill of silence. If you put in metaphor, you'll get using metaphor. So all the skills are there. And that's counsellingtutor.com. It is an academically checked repository of information that we know is correct. It's been looked over by our tutors and our research team to make sure that it is accurate. And of course, if you want to get the handouts and the downloads from today's episode, then just click on the podcast tab at counsellingtutor.com. Go to episode 345. There you will find the show notes about everything that Rory and I have discussed today, and you can kind of download from there. And I think as I say that, Rory, all that's left to say is that this has been episode 345 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
You're absolutely right, Ken. It has been episode 345 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We started off with ethical, sustainable practice, working with rehearsed material, engaging with client stories, and our special roving reporter, Sarah Henry, who's going to be a factor or a person you're going to be hearing a lot of in the coming months, gave us her experience of the lived experience of it. In Practice Matters, we had an interview with Laura Davies, her experience of perimenopause from a therapist's perspective. I think everybody should listen to that because it's something that, male colleagues might want to be supportive of, working with female colleagues who are going through the perimenopause. And then finally, in student services, counselling skills reflection. We did a super deep dive. We went past the 6-foot end and I think into the 12-foot end, where we went really, really deep. How you use counselling skills reflections and how you get better at them. I'd like to thank you for your likes, shares and subscribes. And until the next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.